Blood. That was the first thing Officer Daniels saw when his headlights cut through the misty highway that night. A streak of red across a man's shirt, darkened and heavy, catching the glow like something out of a nightmare. The road itself was nearly deserted, the kind of late hour where you expect nothing but silence, maybe the occasional truck hauling freight. But this was the last thing Daniels thought he'd see. A man standing in the middle of the road, motionless, his body trembling, his hands glistening under the beam of light as though dipped in paint. Except this wasn't paint. This was blood. Daniel's stomach knotted instantly. In 2 decades on the force, he had seen more than his fair share of strange encounters, but nothing ever felt right when there was that much blood and no clear explanation. He slowed his patrol car, letting the red and blue lights flare across the darkness, casting shadows on the man's pale face. The man didn't run. He didn't wave for help either. He just stood there, chest rising and falling fast, like someone caught between fight and flight but unable to choose. The officer's hand slid instinctively toward his holster. "Dispatch," he said into the radio, his voice calm but edged with urgency, "I've got a male on Route 9, covered in what appears to be blood. Possible suspect or victim. Requesting backup, immediate." The man staggered a step forward, and Daniels raised his voice sharply. "Stop right there. Don't move. Hands where I can see them." The man obeyed, raising his hands slowly, fingers spread, as if they weighed 100 pounds each. His eyes were wide, not just scared but hollow, like he'd been staring at something horrific for too long. Daniels shone his flashlight directly at him, and the sight made the veteran cop's throat tighten. Blood soaked the man's shirt front completely, seeping into the fabric and dripping down to his jeans. His arms were smeared, hands sticky and dark. Even his face had streaks. Like someone had reached out and clawed at him, or worse, he had been too close to someone's final moments. "Sir, whose blood is that?" Daniels demanded, keeping his voice firm. The man's lips parted, but at first, no sound came out, only a strained gasp, like his lungs forgot how to breathe. Finally, in a whisper so raw it barely carried across the space between them, he said one word, "Accident." The word made Daniel's gut twist. He had heard it too many times before. Every drunk driver pulling themselves from a wreck. Every abusive boyfriend caught with bruises on his partner. Every desperate suspect thinking that single word could wipe away what they'd done. Accident. Daniels didn't move closer just yet. He studied the man. He was mid-30s, average build, hair plastered with sweat. He wasn't holding a weapon. He wasn't making any sudden moves. But Daniels knew better than to let his guard down. People covered in someone else's blood rarely came with clean stories. "Accident, huh?" Daniels replied carefully. "Then tell me where the other person is. Who's hurt?" The man shook his head violently, as if the words tangled in his throat. His legs buckled slightly, and for a second, Daniels thought he might collapse. But then he straightened again, clutching at the air like he wanted to explain but couldn't. His silence was almost worse than an outright confession. The quiet night made everything louder, the hum of the patrol car engine, the chirp of crickets in the distance, the faint drip of blood hitting the asphalt beneath the man's clothes. Daniels knew time was slipping. If there was a victim out there, they might not have much of it left. "Listen to me carefully," Daniels said, voice firm but measured. "If someone's hurt, we need to find them. Every second counts. You need to speak now." The man finally dropped his gaze, shoulders slumping. His lips trembled as if forming the words hurt more than any wound. "She's..." He stopped, swallowed hard, then whispered again, "She's down there." His bloody hand twitched toward the tree line off the road. Daniel's flashlight followed the gesture, catching only shadows between the pines. A chill raced down his spine. He tapped his radio again, sharper this time, "Dispatch, possible victim in the woods, requesting EMS." Backup ETA? 2 units en route, less than 5 minutes, the dispatcher replied. Daniels kept his eyes on the man. Stay exactly where you are. Do not move. If you try anything, I won't hesitate. The man nodded quickly, his entire frame shaking. For the first time, Daniels saw it, tears cutting pale lines down his blood-streaked cheeks. The patrol officer's heart pounded. He'd faced armed robbers, meth cooks with nothing to lose, even gang shootouts, but this moment felt heavier. This wasn't a crime scene yet. It was a mystery, balanced on a knife's edge between rescue and tragedy. A man covered in blood. A victim possibly fighting for life in the shadows. And Daniels had only instincts and a flashlight to piece it all together. The road was silent except for the whoop of approaching sirens in the far distance. But even as backup drew closer, Daniels knew those next few minutes mattered most. If the victim was alive, he had to find her before it was too late. And as he took one cautious step toward the woods, hands still near his weapon, he couldn't shake the dread curling in his gut. Whatever he was about to find, it wasn't going to be easy to forget. Within minutes, the lonely stretch of road transformed into a scene of chaos. 2 squad cars screeched up, their sirens wailing before cutting to silence, leaving only the strobing blue and red lights bouncing off the trees. The man was on his knees now, handcuffed by one of the younger officers who had rushed in first. His chest heaved up and down like he'd just run a marathon, but his eyes were distant, fixed on the ground as though replaying something only he could see. The paramedics moved fast, surrounding him with medical kits, flashlights, and sharp commands. Any visible wounds? Check his vitals. Possible head trauma. But as they examined him, it became clear, his body told one story, and the blood told another. He had no deep cuts, no gashes, no bleeding that could account for the gallons staining his clothes. Just minor scratches on his arms and face, like he'd stumbled through brambles. That meant one thing. This blood wasn't his. Where's the victim? An officer asked sharply, leaning down close to the man's face. Who's hurt? Where are they? The man's lips moved, but only broken fragments slipped out. It was. I didn't mean. I swear, it just, his voice cracked. Daniels stepped forward, cutting through the confusion with authority. Enough. Sir, we need clarity. Now. If someone is out there bleeding, we don't have time to waste. The man blinked hard, his breathing ragged. He pointed shakily toward the truck parked just yards away. Daniels and his partner exchanged a look before approaching it cautiously. The pickup's headlights were still dimly glowing, throwing a sickly light across the gravel. Daniels yanked the driver's door open, and the smell hit first, iron, sweat, and something faintly sour. His flashlight beam revealed streaks of blood across the steering wheel, smeared handprints on the dashboard, and dark stains soaking deep into the driver's seat. He crouched lower, angling the beam toward the passenger side. That's when he saw it, a strip of torn fabric dangling from the door handle, fibers ripped and jagged, like someone had tried desperately to pull free. The floorboard was the worst. Pools of blood had collected there, congealing but still wet at the edges. Too much blood for someone to simply walk away from. Jesus, his partner muttered under his breath. But there was no body. No sign of anyone sitting there now. Just the hollow, bloody shell of what had happened minutes ago. Daniels slammed the door shut and marched back to the suspect. His voice sharpened, every syllable carrying weight. Where is she? You tell me right now, or so help me. The man broke, his face crumpling like paper. Tears burst from his eyes, and he pointed a trembling hand toward the darkness beyond the roadside guardrail. She's there, down that path. Please, just help her, please, his voice cracked into sobs. The officers didn't hesitate. Guns drawn, flashlights stabbing through the trees, they charged into the woods, leaves crunching under their boots. The dirt trail was narrow, overgrown, but the evidence was clear. Droplets of blood marked the way like a breadcrumb trail. Each one glistened under the light, pulling them deeper into the forest. The further they went, the heavier the air felt, silence wrapping around them except for the rustle of branches. And then, at about 100 feet in, Daniel's beam caught something pale on the ground. A hand. "Over here," he shouted. They rushed forward and found her, a young woman sprawled on the earth, hair matted with blood, her clothes torn, her face pale as moonlight. For a moment, Daniel's heart stopped. But then, a faint sound escaped her lips. A groan. She was alive. Barely. "Get EMS here now." Daniels barked into his radio. The paramedics sprinted into the woods, equipment clattering, voices commanding each other in clipped tones. They knelt beside her, working fast, checking her airway, stemming the bleeding from a head wound that ran deep across her temple. One of them shouted, "Pulse is weak but present. She's hanging on." Daniels stepped back, forcing his own pounding heart to steady. Relief washed through him, but it was tangled with something darker. If they had been 5 minutes later, she might not have made it. As the paramedics stabilized her on a stretcher, one of the younger officers muttered, "So what the hell happened here?" "Car crash." Daniels shook his head, scanning the scene. The skid marks on the dirt path, the torn fabric, the bruises visible even under the poor light, it didn't feel like just a crash. No. There was a struggle here. The paramedics began carrying the woman back toward the road, their faces set with grim determination. Daniel stayed behind for one moment longer, staring at the ground. There were signs of dragging, her body had been pulled a short distance before being left. He clenched his jaw. That man hadn't just found her like this. He had put her here. Back at the roadside, the suspect sat slumped against the patrol car, his face buried in his hands. His clothes clung heavy with the weight of blood, his own tears cutting lines through the stains. He looked less like a monster and more like a broken man, but Daniels knew better. Monsters didn't always look like monsters. As Emily, the name they would later learn belonged to the victim, was loaded into the ambulance, Daniels felt the night shift into something heavier. What started as a strange stop on a quiet highway had unraveled into something darker, a violent confrontation disguised behind the word accident. And though Emily was still breathing, Daniels knew the truth was only beginning to surface. The man's story was going to matter. The evidence was going to matter. But most of all, Emily's voice, if she survived, would matter most. The flashing ambulance lights pulled away, siren screaming into the night, leaving Daniel staring at the man still handcuffed by the roadside. He crouched beside him, eyes cold and sharp. "You say accident," Daniel said quietly. "But from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like something else. And you'd better start talking before the truth talks for you." The man lifted his tear-streaked face, lips trembling as he whispered again, "I didn't mean it." But Daniels had heard that line too many times before to believe it. Back at the roadside, under the constant flicker of red and blue lights, the weight of the night pressed down harder than ever. The young woman had been taken away, her life hanging by a thread in the hands of doctors, leaving behind only the silence of the woods and the man who claimed it was all an accident. Mark, that was the name he finally gave them. He sat on the ground, cuffed, shoulders hunched like the air itself was too heavy to breathe. Officer Daniels crouched in front of him, his flashlight tilted just enough to keep his face in view. "Start from the beginning," Daniels ordered, his tone low but firm. "What happened tonight?" Mark licked his cracked lips, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. He let out a shaky breath before words began spilling out, uneven and broken. We were coming back from a party. I'd had a few drinks, but I was fine to drive. Emily, she didn't think so. She kept telling me to pull over, to let her take the wheel. We started arguing, and it got out of control. Daniels listened carefully, his jaw tightening. He had heard confessions dressed up in excuses 100 times before, but he let Mark continue. She said she was done with me, Mark went on, voice cracking. Said she was tired of me always getting angry, tired of me drinking. She opened the door while we were still moving, trying to get out. I panicked, I grabbed her arm, I didn't want her to get hurt, I just wanted her to stay. I swear, I didn't mean for it to happen. His voice broke into sobs. The truck swerved, the door flew open, and she fell. I stopped as fast as I could. I carried her, tried to put her back inside, but she wasn't waking up. There was so much blood, I didn't know what to do. I thought I could find help, but then you found me. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of a radio from one of the other patrol cars. Daniel studied the man, every flicker of emotion on his face, every shake in his voice. On the surface, the story had pieces that made sense, an argument, a fall, panic. But Daniels couldn't ignore what he had seen with his own eyes, the bruises, the torn clothing, the way her body had clearly been dragged off the road. Why drag her into the woods? Daniels asked finally, voice hardening. If you wanted to help her, why not stay on the road where someone could see you? Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wide, wet with tears. I didn't mean to. I just thought. I didn't know what else to do. I panicked. I was scared of what people would think. Scared of what would happen to me. I wasn't trying to hurt her more. I swear. Daniels leaned closer, his tone cold now. You don't drag a bleeding woman into the woods if you're trying to save her. You do that if you're trying to hide what you did. The words hit Mark like a slap, and his whole body sagged as if the truth was pressing down too hard. He covered his face with his bloody hands, sobbing into them. The younger officer nearby shifted uncomfortably, but Daniel stayed still, his eyes locked on the man in front of him. He'd been a cop long enough to recognize the pattern, denial, excuses, half-truths tangled in emotion. Maybe Mark hadn't set out to kill Emily that night, but intent didn't matter when actions spoke louder. She hadn't just fallen. There had been a fight, a violent struggle, the kind that left marks deeper than any crash. Minutes later, when the scene was cleared and Mark was guided toward the back of a patrol car, Daniels delivered the words that would change everything. Mark, you are under arrest for assault and reckless endangerment. The man's knees buckled as the words sank in, but the officers on either side kept him steady, guiding him inside the cruiser. His sobs echoed inside the car, muffled by the glass. The ride back to the station was silent except for the occasional crackle of the radio. Daniel sat in the front passenger seat, staring out the window at the dark trees rushing by. He wasn't thinking about Mark anymore. He was thinking about Emily. About the faint rise and fall of her chest when the paramedics carried her out. About how fragile life looked under the beam of a flashlight in the middle of the woods. At the station, Mark was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, his bloody clothes bagged for evidence. In the interrogation room, the stark fluorescent light revealed even more. The scratches on his arms shaped like fingernail marks, the faint bruise on his cheek as if she had fought back. Daniels knew the case was building itself, piece by piece. But what struck him most was the look in Mark's eyes when the word assault was read aloud. It wasn't shock. It wasn't outrage. It was resignation, as if deep down, he had known it all along. Later that night, Daniels sat at his desk, filling out the initial report. The details poured onto the page, the condition of the victim, the blood in the truck, the suspect's story. He kept circling back to one thought, how quickly anger and panic could turn a normal night into a tragedy. One bad decision layered on another until it almost cost someone their life. When the call finally came in from the hospital, Daniels exhaled for the first time in hours. Emily had survived surgery. She was still weak, still critical, but she was alive. Relief spread through the precinct, but for Daniels, it wasn't victory, it was a reminder. She had a story to tell when she woke, and that story would likely strip away the last shreds of Mark's excuse. For now, though, Mark sat in a holding cell, head in his hands, rocking back and forth as the weight of the night bore down on him. The word accident might have been the first thing out of his mouth, but Daniels knew better. Accidents didn't leave bruises shaped like fingers. Accidents didn't drag bleeding women into the shadows. The truth was simple. Emily had been given another chance to live. Mark had been given another chance to face justice. And Daniels, tired but unshaken, knew his job wasn't over. Tomorrow, when Emily woke up, the real story would begin. By the time dawn stretched its pale light across the horizon, the scene on Route 9 was quiet again. The flashing patrol lights dimmed, the ambulance long gone, and the woods returned to their stillness, but the weight of what had happened clung to everything. The road carried no traffic, no sound but the soft hum of engines as officers packed up evidence. Yet to Daniels, the silence screamed louder than any siren. Emily was at the hospital now, fighting to survive, and Mark sat locked in a holding cell, his blood-stained clothes sealed in evidence bags. Daniels remained at his desk, his fingers stiff around his pen as he finished his report. Every detail mattered: blood patterns, the skid marks on the road, the torn fabric from the truck door, the scratches on Mark's arms. It all painted a picture of violence that could no longer be disguised as panic or chance. Hours later, the phone on his desk rang, sharp and piercing. Daniels picked up immediately. It was the hospital. Emily had made it through the worst of the night. She was weak, drifting in and out, but alive. Daniel's chest loosened for the first time in hours. For him, survival was the line that changed everything. With Emily alive, her voice would carry weight. She could confirm the truth no blood evidence could tell alone. By afternoon, Daniels drove to the hospital, his badge heavy on his chest. The sterile hallways smelled of antiseptic, and the beeping machines outside Emily's room created a rhythm that was both hopeful and haunting. She lay pale against the white sheets, a bandage wrapped around her head, her breathing shallow but steady. A nurse gave Daniels a quiet nod, signaling that Emily was stable enough to answer a few questions. He pulled a chair to her bedside, keeping his voice soft. "Emily, my name is Officer Daniels. You don't have to talk long, but I need you to tell me what happened last night." Her eyelids fluttered, her lips dry, but she forced the words out in a whisper. "It wasn't an accident." Her eyes welled with tears. "Mark, he was drinking again. He got angry. He yelled at me, grabbed my arm when I tried to get out. He wouldn't let me go." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "When the truck swerved, I fell, but before that, he hit me. That's why I tried to leave. He wouldn't stop." Daniels clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm for her sake. The confirmation cut through every excuse Mark had offered. Emily's words aligned perfectly with the bruises, the ripped fabric, the blood in the truck. What Mark had painted as a tragic accident was now exposed as something far darker, a night of anger spiraling into violence. "Emily," Daniels said gently, "you're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore. We'll take it from here." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but relief softened her face. She closed her eyes, drifting back into the comfort of sleep, and Daniels stood slowly, letting the nurse resume her care. He left the room with the kind of resolve that only came when a victim's voice cut through the fog of lies. Back at the precinct, Daniels laid it out for the prosecutor: assault, reckless endangerment, domestic violence, and with Emily's testimony, attempted homicide. The legal system would take over now, but Daniels knew this was just the beginning of a long road for her. Survivors often carried scars no medical treatment could heal. Mark, however, seemed to sense the walls closing in. In the interrogation room, he sat slumped, staring at the table with vacant eyes. When Daniels entered, he didn't bother with questions at first. He just dropped the case file in front of him, letting the weight of the evidence speak. Photographs of the blood-soaked truck, the torn shirt, the bruises on Emily's body. And finally, Daniel spoke, his tone sharp as steel. "She's alive. And she told us everything." Mark's head lifted slowly, eyes red-rimmed, and for a second Daniels thought he might deny it all again. But instead, Mark let out a long, broken sigh, as if the last of his strength drained out. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he muttered. I couldn't stand her walking away from me. I lost it." Daniels leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You call that losing it? You almost killed her. That wasn't an accident, Mark. That was a choice. Every time you raised your voice. Every time you grabbed her. Every drink you took before getting behind that wheel. You made choices, and last night, those choices nearly cost a woman her life." Mark dropped his gaze, silent, his face twisting in guilt. But guilt couldn't undo what had been done. The charges were filed swiftly, and Mark was led to county jail to await trial. As the doors clanged shut behind him, Daniels knew this wasn't the end of the story, it was just another chapter in a tragedy that repeated itself too often. Domestic violence, drunk driving, anger unchecked. He had seen it before, and he would see it again. But each time, it carved a new mark on his soul. Driving home that evening, Daniels watched the sun dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the road where the nightmare had begun. He replayed the moment he first saw Mark standing there, soaked in blood, whispering "accident" like it was a magic word that could erase the truth. But truth didn't bend so easily. For Emily, survival meant she could reclaim her voice, tell her story, and maybe one day find peace. For Mark, survival meant facing the consequences of his actions, stripped of excuses. And for Daniels, survival meant another reminder of why he wore the badge, to stand between violence and the people it tried to consume. That night, as he sat in his quiet kitchen, Daniels wrote one final note in his personal log. "Monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they look like ordinary men who call their choices accidents. But the blood always tells the truth." And with that, he closed the book, ready for the next call, knowing the job never truly ended.